For a decade, I was the secret weapon behind my family's multi-million-dollar empire. The one they called at 3 a.m. to fix a broken deal, the one who built the systems they all took credit for. I wasn't just in the family business. I was the business. So imagine my surprise when, with no warning and no conversation, my dad sent me a WhatsApp message that said, "You're out of the family business, Maggie. Don't call back." My reply? Just one word. Okay. I blocked their numbers and walked away. I thought that was the end of it. But 48 hours later, my phone lit up with 76 missed calls from the same family who told me to never contact them again. They thought they had kicked me out. They had no idea they'd just declared a war they couldn't possibly win. Want to find out how I took my revenge? Make sure you subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss a single chapter of the story. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments what city you're from. The air in my glass-walled office tasted of stale coffee and multi-million-dollar anxiety. It was a flavor I had grown accustomed to, the signature perfume of Sterling Holdings. Outside my window, the Chicago skyline clawed at a steel-gray sky. Inside, I was the calm eye of the hurricane my family called a business. On my screen, the final red lines for the Blackwood zoning proposal blinked innocently. This deal was my baby. 6 months of schmoozing cantankerous city planners, placating a NIMBY neighborhood association, and re-engineering architectural drafts until they were politically and structurally perfect. It was the kind of intricate, thankless work that my father, Richard Sterling, loved to announce as his own grand victory at shareholder meetings. My phone, lying face down on the polished mahogany desk, buzzed. A low, insistent vibration. I ignored it. It was probably my sister, Clara, sending me another pointless TikTok of a cat falling off a sofa, captioned, "OMG, this is so you LOL." She thought my focus was a personality flaw. My brother, Mark, would be texting to ask for a loan to cover his bar tab from the weekend, a tab likely incurred while entertaining clients he would inevitably fail to sign. The phone buzzed again, then a third time. Annoyance pricked at me. I was 2 clicks away from submitting the Blackwood proposal, 2 clicks from securing a $50 million profit margin for the family. With a sigh, I flipped the phone over. 3 messages on WhatsApp, all from Dad. My father never used WhatsApp. He was a phone call and brusque email man. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Maybe something was wrong. I swiped the notification. The messages were stacked, stark and brutal against the default gray background. Dad, Maggie. Dad, we're making a change. Dad, you're out of the family business, Maggie. Don't call back. I read the last message once, then twice. My brain struggled to connect the words to my reality. You're out of the family business. It was like reading a sentence in a language I almost knew. The meaning was there, but the context was impossible. There was no preceding argument, no dramatic boardroom showdown, no simmering conflict. There was only the quiet hum of the server rack in the corner and the blinking cursor on a deal I had poured my soul into. Don't call back. That was the part that truly landed. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. A cold clarity washed over me, so potent it felt like ice water flooding my veins. The hurt was there, a deep, sharp splinter beneath my ribs, but it was instantly encased in something harder. Rage. Not the hot, screaming kind my father specialized in, but a glacial, silent fury. I could see the scene perfectly. My father, his face florid with self-importance, letting my brother Mark whisper poison in his ear. Mark, whose last major contribution was losing a 7-figure client because he'd shown up to a meeting drunk on mimosas. I had cleaned it up, of course. I always did. He must have finally concocted a lie big enough, a betrayal so profound in its fiction that my father's fragile ego couldn't bear it. My thumbs, steady and precise, moved over the screen. I typed one word, one single, solitary acknowledgement of the detonation of my entire life. Okay. I hit send. Then I began to move. There was no weeping, no begging, no screaming into the void. My grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. My actions became methodical, a checklist I hadn't known I'd prepared for. I clicked Save Draft on the Blackwood proposal, closing the window. They could figure it out for themselves. I opened my personal cloud drive and transferred the few files that were truly mine, a folder of commendations I'd saved, copies of my employment contract, and a heavily encrypted file labeled insurance. From my desk drawer, I took my spare keys, my favorite fountain pen, and a small, framed photo of my mother, taken years before she became the silent, enabling witness to my father's tyranny. I left the company car keys, the corporate credit cards, and the laptop. I unplugged the small lavender plant I kept on my windowsill and left it to die. Walking through the open plan office, I kept my eyes forward. Heads lifted. I was the engine of this place, the one who arrived first and left last. My 2 p.m. departure was an anomaly of the highest order. Sarah from accounting gave me a questioning look. I offered her a small, tight smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. In the elevator, the mirrored walls showed a stranger. A 28-year-old woman in a crisp Tom Ford blazer, her face a pale, emotionless mask. The woman who had given her entire adult life to a business, a family, that had just discarded her like a piece of faulty equipment. As I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, I pulled out my phone one last time. I opened my contacts.
Dad, Mark, Clara, Mom.
One by one, I selected them. The screen offered a final, digital query. Block this contact? I pressed it every single time. It felt like slamming a vault door, heavy and permanent. The world went silent. I didn't go to the trendy South Loop condo my family believed I lived in, the one with the doorman they could charm and the address they all knew. Instead, my Uber drove west, deep into a neighborhood of unassuming brick 3 flats and quiet, tree-lined streets. I got out in front of a gray stone building in Ukrainian village, indistinguishable from its neighbors. My key slid into a lock no one else in my family knew existed. This apartment was my secret, my sanctuary. I'd bought it 2 years ago under a private LLC, paying cash from a bonus I had for once, not funneled back into the family coffers. It was small, minimalist, and entirely mine. No inherited furniture, no photos of smiling sterling faces on the walls. Just clean lines, shades of gray and cream, a bookshelf overflowing with fiction, and a single, perfect orchid on the kitchen counter. I dropped my purse, took off my blazer, and felt the armor of Maggie Sterling, VP of Operations, fall away with it. Here I was just Maggie. I walked to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of brutally cold Sancerre, pouring a glass with a hand that was now, finally, beginning to tremble. The first sip was acidic and sharp, a shock to the system. I leaned against the cool marble of the countertop and let the silence of the apartment swallow the noise in my head. For 10 years, my life had been a constant barrage of notifications, deadlines, and demands. My father's 5 a.m. ideas, Mark's 10 p.m. emergencies, Clara's incessant social drama. My mind had been a command center, constantly triaging the needs of others. Now there was nothing. The silence was terrifying. Then, slowly, it became peaceful. I sank onto the sofa, wine glass in hand, and let the memories come. Not the good ones, the useful ones. I remembered being 22, fresh out of Wharton, and discovering a multi-million-dollar accounting error Mark had made. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights fixing it, crafting a narrative that saved him from both termination and jail time. My father's response? Good. Don't let it happen again. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just an expectation. I remembered the Harrison deal, a landmark hotel acquisition I had structured from the ground up. At the press conference, my father stood at the podium, Clara and Mark flanking him, smiling for the cameras. He never once mentioned my name. When a reporter asked about the complex financial modeling, he laughed and said, "We have good people for that." I was standing in the back of the room, holding his briefing notes. I thought of my sister, Clara, whose official title was head of brand relations, but whose actual job consisted of picking out floral arrangements for the lobby and using the corporate Amex for shopping sprees she passed off as market research. I thought of my mother, whose willful blindness had become an art form, who would pat my arm and say, "Your father just has a lot of pressure on him, dear," after he'd screamed at me in front of the entire executive team. They weren't just a family. They were a dysfunctional ecosystem, and I had been its keystone species. The one who did the ugly, necessary work so they could all flourish. And like a fool, I had thought that made me indispensable. I thought my value was self-evident. The text message proved it wasn't. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister or a brilliant executive. I was a tool. And when they felt I was no longer useful, or when a more convenient narrative presented itself, I was discarded. My second glass of wine went down smoother. The trembling in my hand stopped. The splinter of hurt in my chest dissolved, not into forgiveness, but into fuel. The anger was still there, cold and hard as a diamond. But now it had a purpose. They thought they had cut me out. They had no idea they had just set me free. I finished the wine, went into my bedroom, and slept for 10 uninterrupted hours, the first time in a decade. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window, the city quiet in the mid-morning lull. For a moment, a phantom panic surged through me. I was late. I'd missed calls. My father would be furious. Then I remembered. There was no one to be furious. There were no calls to miss. I made coffee, pulling out a sleek, powerful laptop from a closet. It wasn't the clunky, corporate-issued machine from the office. This was my personal command center. I logged in, the screen coming to life with a quiet desktop, free of clutter. I was a ghost now, and it was time to assess the machine I used to haunt. To my family, Sterling Holdings was a simple pyramid. Richard Sterling sat at the top, the visionary. Mark and Clara were his princely heirs. The employees were the base. But that was a lie. The real organizational chart was a web, and I was the spider at its center. I had built the company's digital infrastructure from scratch. When I started, they were running a multi-million-dollar operation on QuickBooks and a shared Outlook calendar. I designed and implemented a custom enterprise resource planning (ERP) system, weaving together finance, project management, and client relations. I coded parts of it myself, embedding backdoors and master access credentials that only I knew. The official IT department thought they had admin control. Their passwords only accessed the surface layer. Then there were the relationships. I pulled up a password-protected file, the one I'd labeled insurance. It wasn't blackmail, not exactly. It was a meticulously detailed ledger of a decade's worth of favors, handshakes, and unspoken agreements. It was a social map of power in Chicago. There was Alderman Ruiz, who fast-tracked our permits. He only did it because I personally arranged for his nephew's internship every summer and made a company donation to his wife's favorite charity, timed perfectly before each zoning vote. My father thought Ruiz liked his cigars. There was Frank McKenna, the head of the city's largest construction union. A gruff, old-school monolith who hated developers. But he liked me. Because when his crew hit an unexpected sewage line on our West Loop project, I didn't scream about delays and penalties like my father wanted. I went to the site myself, in steel-toed boots, and negotiated a solution that got his men paid overtime and kept the project moving. My contact in his phone wasn't Sterling Holdings. It was Maggie S. He would never take a call from Mark. And the investors. The old money families who trusted Sterling's name, sure, but who only wired the funds after I walked them through the pro forma financials, answering every pointed question my father couldn't. I had their private cell numbers. They had mine. I had built a fortress of competence around my family's ineptitude. I had created the systems, nurtured the connections, and cleaned up the messes. I wasn't just the VP of operations. I was the firewall, the translator, and the janitor. I was the ghost in their machine, and they had just performed their own exorcism. They thought they'd fired an employee. They had no idea they'd just ripped out the company's heart and soul. And I, the ghost, was about to watch the body start to twitch. The 48-hour mark arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet electronic notification. I had spent the day setting up my new life. I established a new business entity with a bland, untraceable name, something like Oakhaven Consulting Group. I opened new bank accounts. I started a list. A list of names. People like Marcus Thorne, the brilliant architect my father refused to pay market rate. People like Lena Petrova, the construction manager I knew was smarter than any of our project leads. As dusk settled, I was nursing a cup of tea, monitoring the city's public records portal, a boring, bureaucratic website I knew better than my own reflection. At exactly 4:01 p.m., a new entry appeared under the Blackwood development docket. Status: deadline missed. Proposal Z 22-481 not submitted by the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time deadline on June 10th. Penalties under Contract Clause 14 (DP) will now apply. There it was. The first domino. I leaned back, a cold, grim satisfaction settling over me. I felt like a doctor looking at an X-ray that confirmed their diagnosis. Clause 14 (B). I had written it myself during the initial negotiations. The city, wary of our reputation for dragging our feet, had insisted on a kill switch clause. If we missed the final submission deadline by so much as a minute, we would not only lose our exclusive development rights but also forfeit our 7-figure deposit as a penalty. It was a draconian term, and I had warned my father about it repeatedly. His response was always a dismissive wave. "You'll handle it, Maggie. You always do." He was right. I would have handled it. I would have submitted it at 3:55 p.m. with every I dotted and T crossed. But I wasn't there. Mark was probably tasked with it. I could picture him, delegating it to an assistant who didn't know the stakes, or forgetting about it entirely until it was too late. He would have looked for the file on the shared drive, not realizing the final version was saved locally on my machine, pending one last sign-off. A 7-figure penalty. 7 figures gone.
Poof.
And that was just the beginning. The loss of the development rights was the real catastrophe. That land was the cornerstone of our next 5-year growth plan. I checked the major real estate news sites. Nothing yet. It would take a day or two for the story to percolate. But the damage was done. The first crack had appeared in the foundation of Sterling Holdings, and no one inside the house had even heard the sound. I closed my laptop. There was nothing more to do but wait for them to notice the building was falling down around them. The silence broke at 5:17 p.m. on Thursday, exactly 49 hours after my exile began. I had just returned from a run along the 606 trail, feeling the burn in my lungs and the clarity in my mind. My old phone, the one I designated as a listening post, was sitting on the kitchen island. I had left it on, connected to the Wi-Fi, its ringer silenced. The screen suddenly lit up, casting a pale glow in the dimming room. The name glowed white. Dad. I stared at it, my heart giving a single, hard thump against my ribs. A reflex. I watched the screen, mesmerized, as it glowed for 20 seconds before going dark. A missed call. A minute later, it lit up again. Mark the Useless. I had programmed that into my phone years ago, after the mimosa incident. I let it ring.
And ring.
Then, dark again. Then a text bubble appeared on the lock screen. Mark the Useless. Pick up the phone, Maggie. Another call, this time from Clara. Ignored. Then the floodgates opened. It was a digital fusillade. My phone began to vibrate and light up in a frantic, ceaseless rhythm.
Dad. Mark.
Dad again.
Clara. Mark.
A number I didn't recognize, probably my father using a secretary's phone. The texts started to pour in, a running commentary of their dawning panic. Mark the Useless. Where are the final Blackwood files? The ones you sent weren't the right version. Clara. Dad is losing his mind. You better call him. Dad. Margaret, I am not playing games. Call me this instant. Mark the Useless. The city just called. They said we missed the deadline. What did you do? What did I do? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I did exactly what you told me to. I left. I made myself a sandwich, moving around my quiet kitchen as the small black rectangle on the island continued its silent, spastic dance. It was like watching a distant distress signal from a sinking ship, a ship I was no longer on. The tone of the messages shifted over the next hour from anger to confusion, then to pure, unadulterated panic. Mark the useless. The penalty is $1.5 million. $1.5 million. This was your project. You have to fix this. Clara, the investors are calling. What are we supposed to tell them? Sarah in accounting can't find the payment authorization for the Harrison project vendors. Dad, pick up your goddamn phone, Maggie. The voicemails they were leaving on my old number were even better. I listened to one from Mark, his voice a high-pitched whine. Maggie, just tell us the password to the primary account server. The one you set up. IT can't get in.
Just text it to me. Please.
This is a nightmare. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. By 10 p.m., the storm had reached its peak. The phone was a blur of notifications. I sat on my sofa, sipping a chamomile tea, and idly counted the missed calls. It became a kind of game. 53, 61, 72. The final call of the night came just after midnight from my father. I watched it ring, the name glowing with an impotent fury. When it stopped, the counter on my lock screen ticked up by 1. 76 missed calls. I looked at the number, the log line of my new life. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a symphony of incompetence, a testament to their arrogance. They hadn't just fired their VP of operations. They had fired their crutch, their safety net, their brain. And they were only just beginning to understand the dizzying, terrifying feeling of a free fall. I turned the old phone face down. The show was over for tonight, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was only the opening act. The morning after the 76-call siege, I woke to absolute silence. They had fallen quiet, likely regrouping, bewildered. That was their mistake. They assumed my silence was passive, a hurt animal licking its wounds. They couldn't comprehend that it was active, a predator lining up its shot. I didn't check the old phone. The data from last night was sufficient. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and brought up the file I had started, the list. It was short, curated, and lethal. It wasn't a list of enemies, but a list of assets, brilliant people my father's ego had either alienated, underpaid, or overlooked. At the very top was one name, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was an architectural genius, a true artist trapped in the gilded cage of corporate contracting. Sterling Holdings had used his firm for years, drawn to his innovative designs like moths to a flame, only to bully him on fees and then sand down his visionary concepts into bland, profitable boxes. My father called him the art project, a necessary evil to get through the planning commission. I knew he was the future. I found his private number, a courtesy he'd given me after I fought to restore one of his design elements my father had cut, and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Thorne. His voice was wary, conditioned for a fight. Marcus, it's Maggie Sterling.
A pause.
The wariness sharpened.
Maggie.
To what do I owe the pleasure? Did your father decide my latest invoice was padded, or has he just realized he hates the color blue today? I smiled. Neither. I'm calling on my own behalf. I'm no longer with Sterling Holdings. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp mind, processing the implications. Wow, he said, the single word loaded with surprise and something else validation. I'm not sure if I should say I'm sorry or congratulations. Save the condolences, I said, my tone crisp and all business. I'm calling to offer you one. A congratulations, that is. I'm starting a new development company, and I want you as my partner. A job, you mean? The cynicism was back, his default setting after years of dealing with people like my father.
No.
I mean a partner.
Equity.
A seat at the table. Full creative control over design. Your name on the letterhead next to mine. I have the capital and the operational strategy. I need a vision. Your vision. The kind my father was too scared to build. I let that hang in the air. I had just offered him the one thing Richard Sterling never could: respect. I detailed my seed capital enough to be taken seriously and the lean, agile operational model I had in mind. No bloated executive salaries for incompetent relatives. No vanity projects. Just smart, profitable, beautifully designed developments.
He was quiet for a long time.
I could hear the faint sound of him sketching on a notepad, a nervous habit I remembered from our meetings. What's the catch, Maggie? The catch is we'll be going up against them.
Directly.
This isn't a hobby. It's a war. Another pause, shorter this time. A deep sigh that sounded less like weariness and more like a lungful of fresh, clean air. When do we start? He asked. The cynicism was gone, replaced by an energy I hadn't heard in his voice in years. Yesterday, I replied. I'll send you the preliminary documents. Welcome aboard, Marcus. I hung up, a cool sense of victory settling over me. The first piece was on the board, and it was a queen. Power isn't just about having money, it's about the speed and silence with which you can deploy it. My family, for all their wealth, was loud and slow. Their every move was ponderous, telegraphed through committees and ego-stroking lunches. I intended to be the opposite, a blade in the dark. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of hyper-efficient activity from the quiet of my apartment. My first action was to give our new venture a name. I christened it Nightingale Developments. The name was a private, bitter joke. A plain, brown bird, easily overlooked, until it opens its mouth and creates a song so powerful it dominates the entire forest. My father had always demanded the showy eagles and lions for his branding. He would never understand the power of the nightingale. Using my shell corporation, Oakhaven Consulting, as a holding company, I officially registered Nightingale. The paperwork was filed digitally, untraceably. Next, I called my most important contact on the list. Not the richest or most powerful, but the most discreet. His name was Arthur Chen, a quiet, formidable investor from Singapore who ran a private equity fund. My father had tried to court him for years, blustering about the sterling legacy. He'd failed. I, on the other hand, had spent an entire 2-hour lunch with Mr. Chen talking about his daughter's university applications and a rare orchid he was trying to cultivate. At the end of it, he gave me his personal contact and said, "Your father sees buildings, Miss Sterling. You see people. Call me if you ever decide to build for yourself." I called him. I didn't ask for a blank check. I presented him with a surgical opportunity. One single parcel of land. It was a neglected, oddly shaped lot in the West Loop, currently occupied by a derelict warehouse. To most developers, it was a tear-down nightmare. But I knew something they didn't. I had overseen the city's 10-year infrastructure plan. That parcel of land, worthless now, sat directly on the path of a new planned utility and transit corridor. More importantly, it controlled the most efficient access route to the construction site of Sterling Holdings' newest, biggest, and most expensive project, the Sterling Pinnacle Tower. They're about to break ground on the Pinnacle, I explained, my voice calm, and even over the encrypted line. They assume they can lease access through this lot for staging heavy machinery. The owner is stubborn and hates my father. He won't sell to them. But he'll sell to an anonymous entity for a 15% premium over market value. We can acquire it for under $2 million. Within 6 months, when Sterling is desperate, that land access alone will be worth 5 times that. And that's before we even announce the boutique hotel Marcus Thorne is already designing for the space. Mr. Chen was silent. I didn't fill the space. I had laid out the facts. He appreciated efficiency. "Your father taught you how to build, Maggie," Mr. Chen said finally, his voice tinged with admiration. "But you learned how to fight all on your own. The funds will be in the Oakhaven account by morning." While Nightingale was being born in the shadows, Sterling Holdings was beginning to publicly decompose in the sunlight. I became a connoisseur of my family's chaos, observing it from the sterile distance of my laptop screen. The first story broke in Crane's Chicago business. Sterling Holdings fumbles major zoning deal, faces multi-million-dollar penalty. The article was brutal, quoting anonymous sources from the planning department who called the missed deadline amateur hour. The company's stock, already jittery, dipped another 8%. My old phone, which I now kept in a drawer like a captured enemy spy, continued to receive arias of desperation. The texts and voicemails were a real-time log of their incompetence. My mother left a long, rambling message that veered from, Your father is just so worried, dear. 2. I don't know why you have to be so difficult, Margaret. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt, which I promptly deleted. The real gold came from Mark. He left a voicemail so frantic it was almost incoherent. Maggie, it's Mark. Look, Mr. Chen's office called. Arthur Chen. He said he won't take my calls anymore. He said his fund is reevaluating its position on Chicago developments. What does that even mean? I only told him that his idea for eco-friendly roofing was a niche market. Dad's going to kill me. You were always good with him, Maggie. Can you just call him? For me? I listened to it twice, savoring the panic. Mark, in his infinite wisdom, had insulted one of the most powerful investors in our Rolodex. An investor who was now my partner. Clara, meanwhile, was conducting her own brand of damage control. She issued a press release that was a work of disastrous art, blaming the Blackwood fumble on a temporary administrative systems failure during a planned upgrade. It was a lie so transparent it was insulting. The tech blogs had a field day, pointing out that no company plans a system upgrade to coincide with a critical project deadline. #Sterling failure started trending locally on Twitter. They were flailing. Every problem I used to solve, every fire I used to extinguish, was now raging out of control. They were trying to fly a 747, and they had just discovered that the pilot, flight engineer, and entire air traffic control team had been one person. And she had just walked out the door. The calls became less angry and more pitiful. They weren't just demanding I come back to work. They were begging me to come back and save them. With the architect and the capital secured, I needed a builder. Someone who knew how to turn Marcus's elegant designs into steel and glass. There was only one person for the job. Her name was Lena Petrova. Lena was, without question, the best head of construction Sterling Holdings had. She was tough, brilliant, and commanded the fierce loyalty of her crews. She had come up through the ranks, starting as a site assistant. She knew every inch of the business, from negotiating with subcontractors to reading a geotechnical survey. She was also a woman in a man's world, and my father had never let her forget it. He'd passed her over for the director of development role 3 times, giving it to less qualified men, including my brother Mark, for a disastrous 6-month stint. My father respected her work, but he would never give her real power. I sent her a text from my new number. Lena, it's Maggie Sterling. I'm no longer at the company. I'd like to buy you a coffee. My treat. We met at a small, independent coffee shop in Pilsen, a place so far off the corporate grid we were guaranteed privacy. She walked in, her posture wary, her eyes sharp. She looked at me over the rim of her mug, waiting. I heard what happened, she said, her voice low and direct. The whole damn company is on fire. What do you want, Maggie? I didn't waste her time. I've started my own company. Nightingale Developments. Marcus Thorne is my partner. Her eyebrows shot up. Thorne? You got Thorne? I'm not offering him a contract. I clarified. I offered him the partnership. The same thing I'm offering you. I'm not looking for a head of construction. I'm looking for a chief operating officer. Full operational authority, a seat on the board, and a share of the profits. Your name on the door. I slid a folder across the table. It contained the initial plans for our first project on the West Loop lot, the boutique hotel Marcus was designing. It was bold, innovative, and structurally complex. It was the kind of project an engineer like Lena dreamed of building. She opened the folder, her expert eyes scanning the blueprints. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile at a business proposal. Richard would never approve a cantilever like this, she murmured, tracing a line with her finger. Richard isn't here, I said quietly. He's over there, trying to figure out why his stock is tanking and his best people are suddenly unavailable. She looked up from the plans, her gaze locking with mine. In her eyes, I saw 15 years of frustration, of being undervalued, of hitting a glass ceiling made of my family's prejudice. They'll try to blacklist you, she warned, though there was no fear in her voice. And me. Let them try, I said. They have to find us first. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. My heart sank for a split second before she spoke. "I don't need to see any more," Lena Petrova said, a fire in her eyes. "Tell me where I sign." 3 weeks after my departure, the first Nightingale flew into the open. Under the cover of a pre-dawn Tuesday, a simple, elegant sign was erected on the chain-link fence surrounding our newly acquired lot in the West Loop. It was navy blue, the color of twilight. In crisp white letters it read, "Coming soon, a Nightingale development." Beneath the text was our logo, a sleek, minimalist silhouette of a singing nightingale. It was understated, confident, and utterly out of place next to the grimy, graffiti-covered warehouse behind it. Its placement, however, was an act of war. The sign was positioned at the exact corner of the lot that abutted the access road to the Sterling Pinnacle Tower construction site. Any truck, any crane, any piece of heavy machinery heading for my father's flagship project would have to drive right past it. It was a billboard announcing our presence, aimed directly at the heart of their biggest investment. I drove past the site late that morning, my window down, the city air cool on my skin. I saw it immediately. A group of Sterling foremen, including the one who used to give me a begrudging nod of respect, were standing on their side of the fence, staring at my sign. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and anger. They would have spent the last week trying to get clearance to use that lot, only to be stonewalled. Now they knew why. My work here wasn't just about building a rival company. It was about strategy. It was about controlling the board. By taking that one small, forgotten piece of land, I had thrown a wrench into the gears of their billion-dollar machine. They would now face months of delays, rerouting traffic and renegotiating permits, all because they didn't have access to a tiny strip of dirt. A strip of dirt that I now owned. The satisfaction was a clean, sharp burn. It wasn't the giddy thrill of victory, but the cold affirmation of a perfectly executed plan. As I pulled away, my new phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. The language was too familiar. "What is Nightingale? What have you done?" There was no question mark. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a king realizing his castle was under siege from a ghost he thought he had banished. I didn't reply. I just smiled and kept driving, the morning sun glinting off my windshield. The war had begun. The time for silent maneuvering was over. My father knew I was behind Nightingale. Now it was time for the rest of the world to know. While Sterling Holdings was still trying to explain to their shareholders why their flagship project was stalled before it even began, Nightingale Developments launched its opening salvo. It came in the form of a press release, distributed at 9 a.m. sharp to every major media outlet and real estate blog in the country. It was everything Clara's panicked, lie-riddled statements were not. Slick, professional, and brimming with unapologetic confidence. Nightingale Developments announces The Alchemy, revolutionary boutique hotel for Chicago's West Loop. The release detailed our vision. The Alchemy, designed by the visionary Marcus Thorne, was not just a building, it was a statement. It featured a zero-carbon footprint, a rooftop garden that would supply its farm-to-table restaurant, and a public art space integrated into its lobby. It was a project designed to resonate with the modern world, a stark contrast to Sterling's portfolio of soulless glass boxes. The media ate it up. By noon, we were the lead story on industry websites. Sterling's loss is Nightingale's gain. One headline read, "The new face of Chicago development," read another. They praised our innovation, our aggressive and brilliant land acquisition, and our clear vision. But the real masterstroke, the move designed to land like a punch to my father's gut, was buried in the final paragraph of the press release. It was a quote from our primary investor. "We believe in ventures that are not only profitable but forward-thinking," said Arthur Chin, CEO of Chin Equity Partners. Nightingale Developments, under the leadership of Maggie Sterling and her remarkable team, represents the future. Their operational excellence and clear-eyed vision are precisely what the industry needs. We are proud to be their partners. Putting my name next to Arthur Chen's was a declaration. Chun was the white whale my father had been hunting for a decade. In one move, I had not only poached him but had him publicly sing my praises while implicitly burying my family. I had taken their most coveted prize and turned him into my greatest champion. The message was clear. I wasn't some disgruntled ex-employee starting a pet project. I was a direct, well-funded, and infinitely more competent competitor. I wasn't just building a hotel on a plot of land. I was building a new empire on the ruins of their arrogance. The siege had begun in earnest. They must have realized threats and anger were useless. Their next tactic was as predictable as it was pathetic: emotional manipulation. And for that, they sent their specialist. 2 days after a press release, the security buzzer for my apartment rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the camera feed. Standing on my doorstep, looking lost and uncomfortable, was my mother. A cold dread, a feeling I hadn't experienced since the day I left, washed over me. This was my sanctuary, my fortress. She wasn't supposed to know it existed. My father must have hired a private investigator. The thought of them probing into my private life, violating this one space that was mine, hardened my resolve. I buzzed her in. I would face this head-on. She stepped into my apartment, her eyes sweeping over the minimalist decor, the lack of family photos, the quiet order of it all. She looked like a woman who had just landed on a foreign planet. "Margaret," she began, her voice trembling slightly. She always used my full name when she was acting as my father's proxy. "This is nice." "It's private," I said, not offering her a seat. "Why are you here, Mom?" "Your father, the family, we're all so worried about you," she said, wringing the strap of her Gucci handbag. This new company. It's so aggressive. You're making a public spectacle." "I'm running a business," I corrected her. "It's what he taught me to do." Or did he forget? "This isn't business. This is a vendetta," she said, her voice rising. "You're hurting your brother and sister. You're hurting your father. He's barely sleeping. You know how his temper gets when he's under this kind of pressure." I stared at her, a lifetime of frustration coalescing into a single, clarifying thought. She wasn't here as my mother. She was here as his HR department, sent to manage a difficult employee. Her concern wasn't for me. It was for the disruption I was causing to her comfortable, well-funded life. She was here to restore the status quo, to get the workhorse back in its harness. My pressure was managing his temper for 10 years, I said, my voice dangerously calm. My pressure was fixing the messes Mark made and covering for the fact that Clara's job is a 6-figure hobby. My pressure was building that entire company while he took the credit. "So you can go back to him and tell him that I am done managing his feelings." Tears welled in her eyes. It was her go-to move. "How can you be so cold? We're your family. Families forgive. Please,
Maggie.
just come home. We can fix this." I saw it then, the years of enabling, of willful blindness that allowed the rot to spread. She was a part of it, a quiet, complicit partner in my own erasure. "There's nothing to fix," I said, walking to the door and holding it open. "And this is my home now. Please leave." She looked at me, her face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. She had never heard the word no from me before. It was a foreign concept. She walked out without another word. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the silent apartment. I had just severed the final, most complicated tie. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel bad. It felt necessary. My mother's visit confirmed my strategy. They were wounded, and they were desperate. It was time to apply pressure to the wound. It was time to make them bleed. That night, I opened the file labeled Insurance. It was my doomsday book of Sterling Holdings, a catalog of every contract, every deal, every vulnerability I had spent years managing and protecting. Now I would use it as a weapon. My first target was their largest tenant, a blue-chip tech firm called Omnicorp that leased the top 10 floors of Sterling's most prestigious downtown tower. Their lease was worth 8 figures a year. I knew for a fact that Mark had been mishandling their account, ignoring service requests and being arrogant in meetings. I also knew their contract contained a meticulously worded service level and reputation clause, Clause 32D, that I myself had negotiated. It allowed them to break the lease with a minimal penalty if Sterling Holdings was found to have engaged in conduct that brought the firm into public disrepute. From a secure email address, I sent an anonymous message to Omnicorp's general counsel. It contained nothing but 3 links: the Crane's article about the Blackwood fumble, the disastrous press release from Clara, and an article about their stock's subsequent plunge. My next target was their primary lender, a conservative, old money bank. I knew the covenants on their largest construction loan required them to maintain a certain debt-to-equity ratio and to retain their top 3 clients. A quiet, untraceable tip to a junior analyst in the bank's commercial risk department was all it took. A tip that suggested they might want to reevaluate Sterling's client stability in the coming weeks. Finally, I focused on a key supplier, the Italian marble importer they relied on for all their high-end lobbies. I knew they were already on shaky net 90 payment terms. An anonymous email suggesting they might want to demand payment upfront for the massive Pinnacle Tower order, given Sterling's recent cash flow issues, would be enough to create a logistical and financial nightmare. I set the dominoes up and pushed. Then I waited. It took less than a week. The news broke like a thunderclap. Omnicorp to vacate Sterling Tower, citing lack of confidence in management. The story sent a shockwave through the market. The stock plunged another 15%. 2 days later, a smaller story appeared, noting that their primary lender had frozen their credit line pending a full financial review. Sterling Holdings was now publicly hemorrhaging money, credibility, and clients. I hadn't needed to lie or fabricate anything. I had simply held up a mirror and forced them to look at the mess they had made of themselves. And it was working more brilliantly than I could have ever imagined. The breaking point came on a Friday night. I was at home, reviewing blueprints with Marcus, when my old phone, which I kept charged in a drawer, began to vibrate incessantly. It was Mark. He called 7 times in a row. I ignored them all. Then came the voicemail. Curiosity got the better of me. I put it on speaker. The voice that came through was thick, slurred, and saturated with the maudlin self-pity that only expensive whiskey can produce. "And Maggie, you gotta pick up," he sobbed, the sound of ice clinking in a glass in the background. It's all falling apart. Everything." He took a long, wet swallow. "It was Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was all her. She told Dad you were trying to steal the Blackwood deal. That you built a back channel to the city planners to cut him out and go solo. She said you called him an old dinosaur who needed to retire." A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was exactly as I'd suspected, only more vicious. I didn't say anything," Mark continued, his words tripping over each other. "I should have. Maggie, I know I should have. But I was jealous, okay? You were always so good at everything. And Dad, he just believed her. He got that look in his eye, that purple-faced rage, and just sent the text. He didn't even think. He started to cry in earnest now, pathetic, gulping sobs. But we need you, Mags. Chun is gone, Omnicorp is gone. The bank has us by the throat. Dad he just sits in his office and yells. He doesn't know what to do. I don't know what to do. You always knew what to do. You have to come back and fix it. Please, Maggie. I'm begging you. Fix it." The voicemail ended with a crash, as if he'd dropped the phone. Marcus looked at me, his face grim. The pathetic little worm. I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. The confession wasn't an apology for the betrayal. It was a complaint about the consequences. He wasn't sorry for stabbing me in the back. He was sorry that he was now bleeding out as a result. I saved the voicemail. It was a useful recording. It was proof. It was the truth, finally dragged out into the light by their own desperation. The confession was followed by a strategic retreat. For 3 days, there was silence. No calls, no texts. They were plotting. Their next move was predictable. If emotional blackmail and drunken confessions didn't work, they would try to buy me. On Tuesday morning, a courier delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope to my apartment building's front desk. It was from Sullivan and Cromwell, my father's notoriously expensive law firm. Inside, on heavy, watermarked paper, was a formal offer. It was a masterpiece of corporate legalese, designed to look like a generous concession while being a profound insult. They offered me the newly created role of president of Sterling Holdings, reporting directly to the CEO, my father. They offered me a 50% raise on my old salary and a seven-figure re-signing bonus. They offered me the large corner office next to my father's, the one I had coveted for years. And then, in the third paragraph, was the line item I knew would be there. Item 4B. The Sterling family will issue a formal family apology for the circumstances leading to the cessation of your employment. A formal family apology. A line item in a contract, drafted by lawyers. It was the most soulless, empty gesture I could possibly imagine. It was their version of remorse, a deliverable, something that could be checked off a list. They still didn't get it. They thought my price was a title, an office, and more money. They thought my hurt could be erased with a contractual obligation. They still saw me as a commodity, a thing to be purchased. They didn't understand that this was never about getting my old job back. It was about taking theirs. I took a photo of the letter with my phone. I emailed it to my lawyer, a sharp, hungry attorney I'd hired the week I was fired. My instructions were simple. Subject: forward, offer. Body: please send them my official response. 45 minutes later, my lawyer forwarded me the email he had sent to the senior partner at Sullivan and Cromwell. It was a model of beautiful, brutal efficiency. Dear Mr. Davenport, we are in receipt of your client's offer to Ms. Margaret Sterling. Ms. Sterling respectfully declines. Sincerely, lawyer's name. I read the words respectfully declines over and over. They were perfect, calm, professional, and absolute. It was a checkmate to their clumsy move. It was the sound of a door being slammed shut, bolted, and barricaded. There would be no more offers. From now on, I would be the one dictating the terms. My refusal was not the end of a conversation. It was the firing of the starting pistol. Their last, best offer had been rejected. They had nothing left to bargain with. Their company was bleeding, their credit was frozen, and their reputation was in flames. They were vulnerable, and I was done waiting. The war moved from the headlines into the quiet, brutal world of high finance. From our new, modest offices, a stark contrast to the mahogany and marble palace of Sterling Holdings, we began the attack. With the full, formidable backing of Arthur Chen's fund and the capital from our other discreet investors, Nightingale Developments began to buy Sterling Holdings stock. There was no dramatic frenzy on a trading floor. It was a creeping takeover, executed with surgical precision by Arthur's team in Singapore. They bought through various brokers and shell corporations, never acquiring enough in one go to trigger alarms. They bought on the dips caused by every new piece of bad news we were often responsible for creating. Sterling stock was at an all-time low, a wounded animal waiting for a predator. To the market, it looked like disparate vultures picking at a carcass. Only I and my team knew that all the vultures reported to one master. In our own war room, a large monitor displayed a slowly but steadily climbing percentage. 12%, 19%, 27%. Lena, Marcus, and I watched it like hawks. While my family was likely huddled in their boardroom trying to decide which limb to amputate to stop the bleeding, we were quietly preparing to take the whole body. 34%, Lena murmured one afternoon, a week into the acquisition. They must be completely blind not to see this pattern. They're not looking for a pattern, I said, never taking my eyes off the screen. They're looking for a single enemy they can fight. A dragon to slay. They can't comprehend a death by 1,000 cuts. Their egos won't allow it. Marcus, ever the architect, had drawn a diagram of their corporate structure. As our ownership percentage grew, he would shade in more of the diagram with a dark blue marker. We're gutting it from the inside out, he said with grim satisfaction. The final push came when a rumor we judiciously started, began to circulate that Sterling was considering filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. A wave of panic selling ensued. The stock price hit rock bottom, and we were there to catch it. The monitor flashed the final number. 51.4%. Silence fell over the room. It was done. The company my grandfather had built, the empire my father had lorded over, the business that had discarded me with a text message, was now mine. My father, oblivious, made the final move on my behalf. Desperate to stop the hemorrhaging and rally his remaining loyalists, he called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The agenda, I was told by a contact still on the inside, was to secure emergency private funding and approve a radical restructuring plan, one that likely involved firing hundreds of employees to save the family salaries. I let them all assemble. I could picture the scene in the main boardroom on the 40th floor, a room I had been allowed in but had never felt welcome in. The heavy drapes, the ridiculously long table, the portraits of my grandfather and father glowering down from the walls. At exactly 2 p.m., the time the meeting was scheduled to start, I walked through the main doors of Sterling Holdings for the first time in months. The receptionist's jaw dropped. I didn't look at her. Flanked by Lena on my right and Marcus on my left, I walked to the executive elevator and used the master keycard I had never returned. We stepped out onto the 40th floor. The air was thick with tension. We walked down the hall to the boardroom. I could hear my father's raised voice from inside. Pushing the heavy oak doors open, I stepped inside. The conversation died instantly. The remaining board members, a collection of my father's aging cronies, stared at me in stunned silence. Clara, sitting to our father's right, gasped. Mark, on his left, turned a pasty white, looking like he was about to be sick. And then there was my father. He was mid-sentence, his face flushed with anger. He stopped, his mouth hanging slightly open. He stared at me, his brain trying to process the impossible image before him. I wasn't standing meekly by the door. I had walked to the head of the table, to his chair, and placed my hands on its back. Maggie, he finally choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. What is the meaning of this? This is a private meeting. Good afternoon, everyone, I said, my voice calm and clear, filling the silent room. Please take your seats. We have a lot to discuss. As the representative of the new majority shareholder of this corporation, I am officially calling this meeting to order. I pulled out the chair and sat down. The king was dead. Long live the queen. The look on my father's face was not anger, not yet. It was the pure, unadulterated shock of a god who had just discovered he was mortal after all. I let the weight of my statements settle into the room, a silence more powerful than any shouting match. I looked down the long table, meeting the gaze of each person. The cronies looked confused, Mark looked like a condemned prisoner, Clara looked indignant, and my father looked like his world had just crumbled to dust. For the sake of clarity, I began, my voice even and devoid of emotion. Nightingale Developments, in partnership with Chin Equity and others, has, over the last 2 weeks, acquired a 51.4% controlling interest in Sterling Holdings. As of this morning, that transfer is complete. This is no longer your company. I slid a thin folder onto the polished table. This is a summary of the gross negligence that has led to a 70% decline in shareholder value over the last quarter. It details the loss of the Blackwood deal, the alienation of key investors, the flight of top-tier clients, and the freezing of the company's credit lines. It also contains a transcript of a certain voicemail confessing to an internal conspiracy to remove a key executive under false pretenses. Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. There will be changes, I continued. This is not a negotiation. These are the terms of the transition. I turned my eyes to my siblings. Clara Sterling, Mark Sterling. Your positions are terminated, effective immediately. Your severance will be the legal minimum. Security will escort you from the building once you have collected your personal effects from your offices. You can't do this. Clara shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. This is our family's company. It was. I corrected her, my voice like ice. It is now my company. And in my company, we don't pay six-figure salaries for Pinterest boards and drunken lunches. I nodded to the 2 security guards I had waiting outside the door. They stepped in. Clara sputtered, but seeing the look on my face, she fell silent, her rage collapsing into a shocked, tearful defeat. Mark didn't even protest. He just slumped in his chair, utterly broken. Then I turned to my father. He hadn't moved, his face a granite mask of fury. "Richard," I said, using his first name for the first time in a professional setting. "You have two options. Option 1. You announce your immediate retirement for health reasons. You will receive the standard board-approved pension and a quiet exit. You will walk out of here today and never come back." I leaned forward slightly. Option 2, you refuse. And I, as the new chairwoman, will call a vote to have you removed from the board for gross negligence, backed by a mountain of evidence. I will then instruct our lawyers to file a suit against you to reclaim the value your incompetence has cost the shareholders. You will not only lose your pension, you will be publicly humiliated. The choice is yours. He stared at me, his jaw working silently. In his eyes, I saw a storm of hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. He was looking for the scared daughter he could intimidate. She wasn't there. He was looking at his replacement. Without a word, he stood up, pushed his chair in with a violent scrape, and walked out of the boardroom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The surrender was complete. 6 months later, the 40th floor was unrecognizable. The dark wood paneling and heavy draperies were gone, replaced with glass walls and clean, white lines. My father's old office, once a dark cave of ego and leather, was now my office, an open, airy space filled with light, modern art, and a single, perfect white orchid. The name on the frosted glass door read, Sterling Nightingale. Maggie Sterling, chairwoman and CEO. I had kept the Sterling name. It was a strategic decision. It retained the legacy and brand recognition, but the addition of Nightingale was a constant reminder of the new order. It was a fusion of the old world's foundation and the new world's vision. My executive team was in the middle of our quarterly review. Lena Petrova, my COO, pointed to a chart showing our production timelines were 30% ahead of schedule. Marcus Thorne, my chief creative officer, unveiled a stunning new design for a mixed-use development that was already attracting investor buzz. Sarah from accounting, whom I'd promoted to CFO, presented financials that showed us back in the black, with a profit margin my father could only have dreamed of. I had been ruthless in my restructuring. The cronies on the board were gone, replaced by competent, independent directors. The dead weight was cut. But I had also been fair. I had promoted from within, rewarding the talent my father had overlooked. I had implemented transparent salary bands and a merit-based bonus system. I was building something strong, something ethical, something that would last. The company culture had transformed. The fear my father had ruled with was replaced by a vibrant energy of collaboration and respect. We weren't just profitable. We were a place people wanted to work. We had taken the best of Sterling, its scale and its history, and infused it with the spirit of Nightingale, agile, smart, and innovative. I was no longer just Maggie. I was the matriarch. I had not just taken revenge. I had built a better world from the ashes of the old one. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. I was the last one in the office, a habit I had never managed to break. I was looking out over the glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline, the city lights like a carpet of scattered diamonds. My city. My company. A faint buzz came from the drawer of my desk. My old phone. I kept it in there, a relic of a former life. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps as a reminder. I slid the drawer open. The screen was lit up with a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but a number I knew instinctively. "I'm proud of you, Maggie." I stared at the words. For words I had longed to hear for my entire life. For words that, had they come a year ago, would have been my everything. I felt a ghost of an old feeling, a flicker of the little girl who just wanted her dad's approval. A pang of what might have been. It lasted for a single heartbeat. Then it was gone, replaced by the calm, steady peace I had worked so hard to build. His pride wasn't a prize I needed anymore. I didn't need his validation to know my own worth. I had forged that myself, in silence and fire. His approval was a currency from a bankrupt nation. I looked at the message one last time. It was the final, desperate move from a king who had lost the war, an attempt to reclaim some shred of relevance in my story. But He was no longer a part of my story. He was the prologue. With a steady thumb, I held down on the message thread. The option appeared. Delete and block. I pressed it without hesitation. The screen went back to being dark. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of exile. It was the silence of absolute, untroubled peace. My silence. My choice. My victory. I closed the drawer and got back to work. And that's how a single word, okay, tore down an empire and built a new one. Maggie got her revenge, her peace, and her power. But now I have to ask you all a question about that very last moment. That final text from her dad. I'm proud of you, Maggie. If you were her, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. Type reply if you think she should have answered him and offered a sliver of forgiveness. Or type delete if you think she made the ultimate power move and was right to cut him off forever. I'm curious to see which side wins. Thank you for following the story, and I can't wait to read your thoughts on whether her family truly got what they deserved.